folks. I'm Bill, and this is Storytime, the segment where we talk about great men and their writings and their influence upon the world. Understanding their great thoughts and knowing their great vision for the world is very important. I hope you will join me today in Storytime to talk about COVID-19, The Great Reset by Klaus Schwab. Hey folks, I hope everyone is doing well today. Started this segment yesterday. We will continue with it. I'm going to have to find my place here because I wanted to go back to the title. But we were somewhere in the middle of the introduction, and I want to get through the introduction today. And I believe we were somewhere around here. Well, we're a little bit further down. Here we go. There's my bookmark up there in the corner. All right. So I'll probably be rereading a little bit of where we were at, but let's see here. We talked about the Black Death yesterday, so let's go here too. The period of 40 days has no medical... Okay, we talked about that. The spread of infectious disease has a unique ability to fuel fear, anxiety, and mass hysteria. I believe we read that as well. I think it's the next page where we were actually at. And I'll just read from here, though. In so doing, as we have seen, it also challenges our social cohesion and collective capacity to manage a crisis. And as I said yesterday, no, the fear has been trumped up by the media, by leaders of the world, not all of them, but the ones that are controlled by globalists for certain. And the next sentence here, it says, epidemics are by nature divisive and traumatizing. Well, I wouldn't say so per se, unless you are a naive person. I made that statement yesterday, of course. We can get into the reasons for trauma, why it happens, but naivety is a large factor in that. What we are fighting against is invisible. Our families, friends, and neighbors may all become sources of infection. Those everyday rituals that we cherish, like meeting friends in public places, may become a vehicle for transmission, and the authorities that try to keep us safe by enforcing confinement measures are often perceived as agents of oppression. Well, my friends and family are not the enemy, and those who would oppress me are. Plain and simple. Throughout history, the important and recurring pattern has been to search for scapegoats and place the blame firmly on the outsider. Yeah, maybe that is the thing that happened throughout history, because as he said before, if you go back to yesterday's segment of the reading of this introduction of The Great Reset, you can see that he talked about outsiders coming into new societies causing problems. That's historically correct. It doesn't mean they can't integrate or we can't take in strangers. It means that there is a proper way to do it and a process. And then here he gets into the racial motivations of things. Interestingly, we are now blaming the insiders. And the true reality is this thing came from China, came from outside the United States or Europe or anywhere else in the world. It started in Wuhan. In medieval Europe, the Jews were almost always among the victims of the most notorious pogroms provoked by the plague. Yeah, the Jews have been a scapegoat for a long time. That is sort of their biblical history, right? The Romans didn't like them. The Catholic Church, as it became Romanized, excised them. Although all the early Christians were Jewish, this is just par for the course. The Bolsheviks largely got rid of Jews. They didn't like them, even though there were a lot of Jews leading Bolshevism in the former Soviet Union. You have to understand, though, there's a difference between the secular Jews, the Jews that are, let's say, worldly and don't care for their religion, atheistic, and the religious pious Jews, which generally leave people alone. It says, one tragic example illustrates this point. In 1349, 2 years after the Black Death had started to rove across the continent, in Strasbourg, on Valentine's Day, Jews who'd been accused of separating of spreading the plague by polluting the wells of the city, were asked to convert. About 1,000 refused and were burned alive. During that same year, Jewish communities in other European cities were wiped out, forcing them to massively migrate to the eastern part of Europe, in Poland and Russia, permanently altering the demographics of the continent in the process. What is true for European anti-Semitism also applies to the rise of the absolutist state. The gradual retreat of the church and many other historical events can be attributed in no small measure to pandemics. I would completely disagree, but this guy is liking to reframe the world. In fact, I have a video, which I will link at the end of this video, about what the early Christians did in the 3rd century, the plague of Cyprian. And it did not destroy the church at all. In fact, the church was always the caretakers. Now, I differentiate the true church, the people within the body of Christ, the believers in the faith of Christ, and those who would take his words literally and how to act. Of course, he uses metaphors, but obviously you have to have some sort of discernment to understand when a metaphor is a metaphor or an analogy versus a direct spoken imperative, right? But the church was not that, as far as the institutionalized church, the Roman Catholic Church. That's not, folks, Christ never said that would exist. None of the apostles did. In fact, all the churches were independent. It's one of the reasons why eventually the Eastern Orthodox Church left the split from the Roman Church, because the Roman Church wanted to influence them. And that started very on because they were Romanized. But that's a whole nother ordeal. The changes were so diverse and widespread that it led to the confinement and lockdowns imposed upon much of the world to manage the coof. Hold on. Did that go somewhere wrong? Why did that go backward? There it was. The changes were so diverse and widespread that it led to the end of an age of submission, bringing feudalism and serfdom to an end and ushering in an era of enlightenment. That had nothing to do with plagues. I mean, the plagues may have influenced it, but what really happened was the church suppressed knowledge, much like knowledge is being suppressed now by those who are fans of Mencius Mollberg, Curtis Yarvin, the neo-reactionaries, if you would, call it the cathedral, the people who run everything in the government and the propagandists and the media and so forth. This was the same during the Middle Ages, and technology wasn't developing. People weren't that literate. And there wasn't a lot of stability within governments. The most stable government was essentially the church. And there was a lot of war. Life was hard. And again, technology was not progressing. What happened? Well, over time, some stability set in. Governments were sort of getting better. People were becoming mercantiles again. And as that happened, people started coming up out of poverty. Now, most people, even the rich folk of the day, still lived in some form of poverty, what we would consider poverty compared to our luxury of today. But I digress. Let's get back into this. Put simply, the Black Death may have been the unrecognized beginning of modern man. No, not at all. It's a stupid thesis and totally not true. If such profound social, political, and economic changes could be provoked by the plague in the medieval world, could the coof pandemic mark the onset of a similar turning point with long-lasting and dramatic consequences for our world today? No, because it's not that bad, folks. And I know, somebody, people died. Yeah, I get it, okay? People die all the time that you don't pay attention to as well. From little diseases. From common colds, people get pneumonia and die all the time. That's what this is. Or, as I have speculated before, and it's pure speculation, there is some sort of genetic component where this hits specific people. You know, that they have some sort of genetic marker somewhere in their system. I'm not saying racial or ethnic or anything like that, but just something, and it hits them. But for the most part, what I am seeing, what the numbers tell me, is that it's people who are immunocompromised, who are older, who have health problems, and who are obese, which is also why it's hit the Latin and Black community so hard, because that's what's going. That's it. And if you're malnourished, folks, disease is going to hit you harder as well. I've read reports about this in the UK doing the same thing. But all the stuff that's going on right now isn't because this thing has shut everything down and people are dying. How many people do you know that have died of this thing? How many people do you know who have had it and who were fine? Or maybe you had it yourself. This isn't like smallpox that killed a third of all people, or the Black Death. It's nothing like that. Things are shutting down because the governments are choosing to do so. We're choosing this course. It's not put upon us other than by those who would presume to be our leaders. Unlike certain past epidemics, the COOF doesn't pose a new existential threat. It will not result in unforeseen mass famines or major military defeats and regime changes. Well, why not if it's the worst thing ever? And actually, it will result in massive famines because governments are not allowing economies to work. And the first world economies break down, third world economies go to nothing. And guess who starves to death? All those poor people who live in Africa and South America and other parts of the less developed world. And I can tell you right now, reading as much as I've read throughout my life, especially over the last 15 years, about the globalist plans, they want that. They want to depopulate that part of the world. And anyone else who can come up here to where infrastructure is placed, they say, go right ahead. It will not result in unforeseen mass famines or major military defeats and regime change. Whole populations will neither be exterminated nor displaced as a result of the pandemic. Then what's the big deal? However, this does not equate to a reassuring analysis. In reality, the pandemic is dramatically exacerbating pre-existing dangers that we failed to confront adequately for too long. Now, I would agree with that statement if he was talking about pre-existing conditions, if he was talking about the health of Western nations, because they tell us to eat grains and eat like a ton of seed oils, ultra-processed oils. Eat your margarine, folks. You know, margarine was created to be an industrial lubricant. They couldn't market it that way, so they're like, oh, margarine, Crisco as well. And what have we done now? We found out, well, trans fats are completely destroy your health. Pretty much any dietary advice you are given by any government body, I rest assured, is the complete opposite of what you should be doing. Eat your meat, folks. Eat the fat on the meat. I'm telling you right now. Stay away from carbs. Stay away from grains. Eat your veggies, but man, your leafy greens, cook them. Because if you're going to eat them, there's a lot of bad stuff in there that can make you sick if you don't cook it out. There's a lot of toxins in plants, folks. And we're not meant to digest plants. We don't have several stomachs. We have a little tiny stomach. It will also accelerate disturbing trends that have been building up over a prolonged period of time. What trends are those? Well, those are probably the trends of inequality, and we need equity, and all those buzzwords of the postmodernists who wish to bring in the one world communist utopia. To begin elaborating a meaningful response, we need a conceptual framework or a simple mental map to help us reflect on what's coming and to guide us in making sense of it. Insights offered historically can be particularly helpful. This is why we are often search for reassuring mental anchors that can serve as benchmarks when we are forced to ask ourselves tough questions about what will change and to what extent. In doing so, we are looking for precedents with questions such as, is the pandemic like the Spanish flu of 1918? No, No, it is not. Estimated to have killed more than 50 million people worldwide in 3 successive waves. Could it look like the Great Depression that started in 1929? The Great Depression never would have been a thing if Hoover did not try to interfere with it. And FDR didn't extend it and have authoritarian control over the economy. Folks, you cannot centrally plan everything. Things are too complicated. That is why market forces, which are natural forces, actions of human beings that we do naturally, we can see these patterns occur, are the best way to do things. There's a great book that I mentioned quite a bit. You can get on vonmises.org for free in PDF form, or go buy yourself a little paperback copy of a study done in the 1970s, and the two authors looked at the history of wages and price controls. 40 centuries worth, 4,000 years to educate us, yet somehow we haven't figured it out yet. You know why? Because despite what the commies say, that it's never been tried, it's been tried over and over and over again in one form or another, and it never works. You know, it does work, allowing people to be free. But there's always an authoritarian around the corner to tell you how to live your life. It's like you have a permanent mommy up your butt about cleaning your room or something. Is there any resemblance with the psychological shock inflicted by 9/11? Are there similarities with what happened with SARS in 2003? No. H1N1 in 2009? A bet on a different scale. H1N1 was not a thing. I mean, it was a thing. It existed. People got sick. The death rate was not that big of a deal. And just about every one of us probably had it, by the way. I'm more than certain I had it anytime there's any sort of flu going around. Although I've never tested positive for the flu. Anytime I've ever had to go in to get a doctor's note because my job required it when I was sick. Of course, I worked for a bunch of idiots that would rather encourage people to come in with fevers and get everyone else sick, which costs more money over time as you have to call in overtime and everything else. But, that's why I don't work for people anymore, because the lack of ethics and leadership is astounding to me. Could it be like the great financial crisis of 2008, but much bigger? No. The correct, but a bit unwelcome answer to all of this is no. Oh, well, good, because I keep saying that too. None fits the research and pattern of the human suffering and economic destruction caused by the current pandemic. No. No, Klaus. Nobody. No, it's not the pandemic that did this. It is the force of the government. It is the people with the guns doing this. Attila's Gym in New Jersey has been shut down, and they keep opening it up. And the guy was getting money and funds in, had $170,000 saved up, and they seized it. They seized his bank account. Because you will obey, or you will suffer. Nothing to do with the pandemic, everything to do with government action. The economic fallout in particular bears no resemblance to any crisis in modern history. Completely untrue. The the Spanish flu was far worse than this. As pointed out by many heads of state and government, in the midst of the pandemic, we are at war. No, that's just called hyperbole. But with an enemy that is invisible. And of course, metaphorically, if what we are going through can indeed be called a war, it is certainly not a typical one. After all, today's enemy is shared by all of humankind. What do you mean it's not a typical one? You were talking about the Black Death, where a third of Europe died. Smallpox. Before we learned how to inoculate it in the West, and I don't know, 1700s, whenever it was, killed a third of anyone who had it. Those who got it were often, and who survived, were often horribly scarred the rest of their life, disfigured. The difference is those people were more mentally sound because in order to survive, they had to work. And now we have crazy people who think that they have a right to survive whether they make their way in this world or not. That said, World War II could even so be one of the most relevant mental anchors in the effort to assess what's coming next. Nope. World War II was the quintessential transformational war. That is true because it did what the First World War was supposed to do, and that is create a global government. Didn't quite work. The League of Nations was too weak. Triggering not only fundamental changes to the global order and the global economy, but also entailing radical shifts in social attitudes and beliefs that eventually paved the way for radically new policies and social contract provisions like women joining the workforce before becoming voters. Women have always been in the workforce. This is a stupid, revisionist history, feminist, commie talking point. Women have always worked. They've always worked in the fields. They've always done work. They didn't always have to stay home in the house. That is just dumb nonsense. Mind you, let me remind you that the oldest profession in the world is prostitution and still goes on in many third world nations. Women actually prostitute themselves in order to essentially make money for their families, and they do it largely because they don't have any other economic means. When we talk about sweatshops over here, like the bunch of arrogant jerks that we are, we don't realize that that's really good for those folks. They need to do that. And this is just a progression of how societies work. We had long labor hours when the Industrial Revolution started. Other nations that are coming up are going to have the same until they can get enough infrastructure and people can have more free time, more liberty to have luxuries. That's how it works. It is a natural cause and effect. And yeah, this idea that women were never in the workforce before is just hogwash. Women were nurses, of course. They were in wars. They were often teachers. They worked in fields, like I said. They worked in stores with merchants. Now, a lot of women couldn't have credit and other things like that. There were laws on that. There are reasons for their laws, very traditional reasons. People don't agree with today, but, you know, I'll just sum this up. When Aristotle was examining the different kind of city-states in Greece, he spoke about the Spartans and thought that the downfall of the Spartans was because they allowed their women to vote and to have too much influence and power. And folks, I'm an egalitarian, but, you know, facts are facts. This modern movement of, you know, women in power or whatever, I mean, fine, some women are suited for that. Most, you would be happier otherwise, and there are studies to back this up. There are obviously fundamental dissimilarities between a pandemic and a war that we must consider in some detail in the following pages, but the magnitude of their transformative power is comparable. Both have the potential to be a transformative crisis of previously unimaginable proportions. However, we must be aware of superficial analogies. Even in the worst case, horrendous scenario, the coup will kill far fewer people than the Great Plagues, including the Black Death or World War II did. So what are you complaining about then, Klaus? You're not complaining about anything. You're using this as an excuse. As an excuse to be an authoritarian. That's what you're doing. Furthermore, today's economy bears no resemblance to those of the past centuries that relied on manual labor and farmland or heavy industry. Untrue. I read to you the other day statements from the World Bank about, I was talking about bankers and banking and influence in the world, and this is still a large part of society. Just because those of us in the Western world get to sit at home on a computer or whatever else, that's not everybody. I've been a manual laborer my entire life. Now, granted, security work is not the most physical, but wait till you have to take a hold of somebody. And it's certainly a lot of being on your feet and running around, getting here, getting there. You got to carry gear all day. You know, it's not like carpentry or anything like that. It's not like construction or hauling stuff around, but I've done jobs like that too. So this idea that doesn't exist anymore, well, I'm pretty sure Klaus Schwab is quite wealthy, quite quite wealthy. In today's highly interconnected and interdependent world, however, the impact of the pandemic will go well beyond the already staggering statistics related simply to death, unemployment, and bankruptcy. The COOF Great Reset is written and published in the midst of a crisis whose consequences will unfold over many years to come. Little wonder that we all feel somewhat bewildered, a sentiment so very understandable when an extreme shock strikes, bringing with it the disquieting certainty that its outcomes will be both unexpected and unusual. No, its outcomes are very expected. Look, I've been on the same train the whole time, and I started making videos. I've been wanting to do it for a long time, but I just hadn't. And I was like, when the riots and things happened, I was just like, enough, okay? I have to speak. But I was posting things on my social media, talking to my family, whatever else. We've known everything we needed to know about this thing back in March, but specifically April and May. We knew. It was out there. I have the articles. I like to bring them up on occasion. If you are proactive in your research, or at least searching out people who will be honest like me towards you with data, I promise you, you don't have to live in fear. It doesn't have to be shocking or earth-shaking or shattering. Like this whole idea that the governments took over everything, par for the course as far as I'm concerned. It's like, okay, it's what they always do. Okay. But see, I'm not naive about the world. Anyways, it says this staggerness is well captured by Albert Camus in his 1947 novel, The Plague. Yet all these changes were, in one sense, so fantastic and had been made so I'm not going to be able to read that, whatever. I know it's a simple word. Perception, whatever. That it was easy to regard them as likely to have any permanence. This is when dyslexia comes out, folks. It happens. It's random. Now that the unthinkable is upon us, what will happen next in the immediate aftermath of the pandemic and then in the foreseeable future? It is, of course, much too early to tell with any reasonable accuracy what the COOF will entail in terms of momentous changes. But the object of this book is to offer some coherent, conceptual, sound guidelines about what might lie ahead and to do so in the most comprehensive manner possible. Our aim is to help our readers grasp the multifaceted dimension of the changes that are coming. At the very least, as we will argue, the pandemic will accelerate systematic changes that were already apparent prior to the crisis. So it's going to accelerate things that were already there prior. Like what? Huh? No, you're just going to do what you want to do, man. That's what this is about. It's about finding an excuse to do what you want to do. The partial retreat from the globalization. Oh, yeah, that partial retreat from globalization. You mean Donald Trump. That's what you're saying. The growing decoupling between the U.S. and China. You mean Donald Trump. That's what you're saying. The acceleration of automation. Concerns about heightened surveillance. That's not going to change when they move everyone into the cities and control them constantly. Come on. We're talking about digital passports and stuff. The growing appeal of well-being policies. Rising nationalism. There's nothing wrong with nationalism, folks. There's nothing wrong with wanting your nation state to have its own sovereignty and to dictate your own destiny. And the subsequent fear of immigration. It's not fear of immigration. I love how they frame these things, these freaking commies. It's not fear of immigration. It's understanding what troubles it causes. And we want to do it right. But see, this is what they do. It's the emotional appeal. It's the grab to your emotional core, because this is the easiest way to reach anyone is get them in an emotional place, an emotional argument. You know, back when I was a few years ago, before I was married, I was, in a bad place, and my soul was crushed from my first wife, and I used to, date a lot of girls. And one of the ways you get girls is you appeal to their emotions. You give them a fun time. And I'll tell you what, it's easy. It's very easy if you know what you're doing. Appeals to emotion are manipulative. The growing power of tech, the necessity for firms to have an even stronger online presence. The necessity? No, he's talking about censorship and control, among many others. I don't know why this is underlined, by the way, guys. I did not do this. I did not read ahead. But it could go beyond a mere acceleration by altering things that previously seemed unchangeable. It might thus provoke changes that would have seemed inconceivable before the pandemic struck, such as new forms of monetary policy like helicopter money. Already a given. I don't even know what that term means. Helicopter money? Never heard of it. I'll have to look it up after this. The reconsideration, recalibration of some of our social priorities and augmented search for the common good as a policy objective, the notion of fairness, acquiring political potency, radical welfare, and taxation measures, and drastic geopolitical realignments. Let's break that down. Recalibration of some of our social priorities. That means that we have to enact racial justice. And if you're white, you're on the bottom of the list, guy, because you get scapegoated. Augmented search for the common good. Well, the common good, that means the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few, right? That means you're expendable if you don't go along with what is for the common good. By the way, who decides what is the common good? See, I have a really simple philosophy, and something like this: leave everybody alone and let them decide for themselves. But guys like Klaus Schwab, he doesn't get that. He's an authoritarian, and he thinks he's smarter than you and gets to tell you how to live your life. The notion of fairness and acquiring political potency. Well, I don't even know what that's supposed to mean, other than we know the system is rigged and manipulated, so fairness to them is winning. Radical welfare. So you want to make everyone slaves. Because when all your food and your shelter come from someone else, you now have a master. Like, I don't need to get complicated and, deep in the weeds and philosophical thought about, how this isn't that or whatever. First principles, folk. First principles. Things are very simple. I think it was Einstein that said, make everything as simple as possible, but not more. And that's what I try and do. And taxation measures. Radical welfare and taxation measures. Meaning, your money will be taken from you. A great argument from TIK History, which is a YouTube channel that's really good, that he makes is, what part of my money being taken away, at what point am I a slave? Is it 10%? Is it 50%? If I get to keep 40% of my money, am I 60% a slave? Because I worked for it. Why does someone else get it? You go, well, but Bill, the common good, we got to help everyone else, got to spread the wealth. Okay, yeah, common good, sure, common good. So does that mean welfare mothers sitting at home eating bonbons and having 16 kids without any father? By the way, that's completely non-racial. That has nothing to do with anyone's ethnicity. There's folks all over ethnic groups that do that. But you'll see that there are some ethnic groups that have different cultures that don't allow for that, while others fall into that more often than others, including white folk. The notion of fairness, acquiring political potency, radical welfare, and taxation measures. The drastic geopolitical realignments. Geopolitical realignment sounds like new nations, new borders, new lines. Excuse me. The broader point is this: the possibilities for change and the resulting new order are now unlimited. Notice the words new order. See, this is a rebranding, by the way, of the idea of the New World Order. And this is a rebranding of Agenda 21 I've talked about before, or Agenda 2030. from the UN. That's all this is. It's just a rebranding. And now it's the Great Reset. How can you be against it? Everything's so bad. Actually, everything's been really good the last couple of years that Trump's been in office, even with all the craziness. Like, economically, very good. I think the average household had a $5,000 raise. $5,000 versus like the $100 that people got, $150, $200, whatever it was, for the 16 years of Obama and Bush. Come on, folks. Let's get real. The broader point is the possibilities for change and resulting new order are now unlimited and only bound by our imagination, for better or for worse. Why are they unlimited all of a sudden? Because you have an excuse. So societies could be poised to become either more egalitarian or more authoritarian. You're looking for more authoritarianism. We know that. Or geared towards more solidarity or more individualism, favoring the interest of the few or the many. Okay, individualism favors the many. It's the other way around, but you've been brainwashed to think differently. And Schwab knows better. He knows better. It says economies, when they recover, could take the path of a more exclusivity and be more attuned to the needs of our global commons. Commons. That is kind of like the root of communism. Or they could return to the functioning as they did before. You get the point. We should take advantage of this unprecedented opportunity to reimagine our world and a bid to make it a better and more resilient one as it emerges on the other side of the crisis. Let me repeat that. We should take advantage of this opportunity to reimagine our world. I didn't ask for that. Who voted you in? By the way, I like to see Klaus Schwab's charity givings because I'm telling you right now, that dude is very rich. The World Economic Forum has something like a $60,000 entrance fee for a week-long conversation with a bunch of CEOs, and corporate entities, banks, and whatever else, because, guys, this is how the world actually works and who runs it. It's what the modern era is. The sovereign nation state is an illusion. We are conscious that attempting to cover the scope and breadth of all the issues addressed in this book is an enormous task that may not even be possible. The subject and all the uncertainties attached to it are gargantuan and could have fulfilled the pages of a publication 5 times the size of this one. But our objective was to write a relatively concise and simple book to help the reader understand what's coming in a multitude of domains. It's a certainty, according to Schwab. By the way, guys, I'm about at 38 minutes here, but I'm going to try and finish this out. So this might be one of the longer ones that I end up doing. To interpret the flow of the text as little as to interrupt the flow of the text as little as possible. The reference information appear at the end of the book and direct attributions have been minimized. Published in the midst of the crisis and when further waves of infection are expected, it will continuously evolve to consider the changing nature of the subject. Further additions will be already apparent prior to the crisis. The partial retreat from globalization, and he's also talking about Brexit, folks. He's talking about the UK. Again, he's saying, oh, you got away. You got away from the global order. You can't do that. You can't secede. You can't be on your own. It's pretty disgusting. We didn't cut off trade or anything. Come on. The growing decoupling between the U.S. and China. Oh, you know what? This looks like it jumped on me. Future editions will... There we go. All right. We went back a little bit. Sorry about that. It said future editions will be updated in view of new findings, the latest research, revised policy measures, and ongoing feedback for readers. I'm sure it will, and I'm sure it'll be a bunch of nonsense, a bunch of propaganda. This volume is a hybrid between a light academic book and an essay. It includes theory and practical examples, but it's chiefly explanatory, containing many conjectures and ideas about what the post-pandemic world might and perhaps should look like. It offers neither simple generalizations nor recommendations from a world moving to a new normal, but we trust it will be useful. This book is structured around 3 main chapters, offering a panoramic overview of the future landscape. The first assesses what the impact of the pandemic will be on the 5 key macro categories: the economy, societal, geopolitical, environmental, and technological factors. I don't know why. The only thing that this should be is societal and economic, because it's a pandemic. And the economic factor and societal factor are run by the governments, because we have centralized authoritarian governments and we don't have true free markets. The second considers the effects in micro terms on specific industries and companies. The third hypothesizes about the nature of the possible consequences at the individual level. Ooh. And then the next chapter, or the first chapter, is the micro reset. Hey guys, thanks for bearing with me there through that, and my my brain not functioning sometimes when it does. If anyone out there listening doesn't understand, like, dyslexia is kind of weird, because you can learn compensations, but you see something, and even though you can kind of see what it is, it's not fitting together in your brain right. It's whatever. It also lets me be fairly objective and look at the world in a very broad, connected way as well, that other people seem to not be able to do. So all curses are blessings, and you should recall that. So, thank you, folks, for joining me for story time, where we read about very, very important books, about very prestigious people and their great thoughts, and how they can shape and mold all of society. I'll be back very soon with a new episode. This has been Bill from All Minus One Storytime. You all be well.